Hello and welcome to Bread and Thread, a podcast about food and domestic history. I'm Liz.
And I'm Hazel. We're two friends who studied archaeology together and love history, and also making things. So Liz, what are you making at the moment?
I am making a secret surprise for your birthday.
Oh gosh.
I will only tell you there is thread and
Okay.
there is a pun.
I am super excited. Is it something embroidered, perhaps?
I'm not giving you more than that.
Oh no! This sucks, but also I love it. Thank you.
And we've also been continuing the cook something from a random country thing that we've been doing. We made kabsa, which is a Middle Eastern chicken thing. Which Nick wasn't sure about because it's one of those Middle Eastern things that's like, okay, you've got your meat, you've got your sauce, you've got your rice, and then you've got your orange and your almonds.
Okay. Oh, that sounds pretty good, actually.
Absolutely gorgeous. Like, almond and chicken is chef's kiss. And now I have a load of just loose, well, not loose, but a load of spare almond in the cupboard, so I'm going to have to make some orange and almond cookies or something.
I was just imagining you with a cupboard full of loose almonds. Like you open it and they all just fall on you.
I mean, that did happen to me with poppy seeds once.
Oh no. There are worse things to have fall on your face, I guess.
It was a mess. So what have you been making or baking?
I'm in the planning stages of a new project, conveniently ignoring like the other 2000 that I have started.
Crafter if you don't have at least 5 projects on the go at once.
Yeah, like if you don't have just continual low-level guilt from all of the projects you haven't finished, it's not real. So I have some green linen fabric that I bought a few years ago on sale, and I think I have a couple of meters of it, I think. So I want to make a skirt, but I have been learning hardanger embroidery recently. So if you haven't heard of hardanger, it's a traditional Norwegian style of embroidery that involves cut work. So you cut some of the threads and you like wrap them with the embroidery threads to make sort of cut work patterns. So I thought it would be quite fun if I made like
after this episode goes up.
Yes, I will do. I thought it would be quite fun to make a kind of modern style. I'm gonna make just like a simple green circle skirt and then make some hardanger pieces in red embroidery to decorate it with. And that's the plan.
Sounds really Christmassy.
It does sound a bit Christmassy. It hopefully won't look too Christmassy.
Hey, why not have a Christmas skirt?
I like the combination of red and green. Why does it have to be Christmas?
Well, that's the style as well, I think. But genuinely, why not have a Christmas skirt? Just have some nice thick tights underneath. You'll be fine.
I'll just stand in place of the tree. And people will hang chocolates on me.
I will already hang chocolates on you if that's what you really want.
Aww. That's true friendship. Find you somebody who will hang chocolates on you.
So, at the risk of going down some very weird rabbit hole, what are we learning about today?
Well, it's funny you should mention weird random rabbit holes because today I have a pretty niche subject to talk about, but I thought it was a really interesting one. So we've done a lot of sort of food history things recently, but not so many textile ones. So I thought I would talk about knitting in prisons.
Ooh.
And the history of that, which apparently is a thing.
I guess that makes sense. Like, it's a very sort of calming activity.
Yeah, but it turns out it was done for quite a few other reasons, especially in the 19th century. Some good, some not so good.
I'm scared now. You said
Yeah.
19th century prisons. I'm scared.
Yeah, well, I'm also going to mention prison reform and Elizabeth Fry and like things getting a bit better. So it's not all like terrible. And there's a lot more to this than I at first thought as well. So I got started off on this when I read an article in the Knitter magazine, which, if you're in the UK, you can get through the library service for free online, which is great. So there was an article about knitting. It's called Knitting Behind Bars, Knitting Behind Bars in the 19th Century. It's an issue 122 of the Knitter by Penelope Hemingway. And it was about knitting in Victorian prisons, which I had no idea was a thing. So apparently prisons, kind of before the whole prison reform movement, were obviously a pretty horrible place to be, and you were kind of on your own. Like if you were in a old-timey prison, you basically had to try and do what you could to maybe get some money to survive or something. And as you might expect, people were not having a great time in there. And then in the 19th century, they decided, oh, wait, we can get people to do work for free in prison, which, of course, still goes on today. And there are some companies today that still use unpaid prison labor, not only in less developed countries, but in the US and the UK as well. So, yeah, definitely check that out and maybe have your say on it.
Well, yeah, I think famously at this point, when slavery was ended in the US, there was a specific stipulation of except as punishment for a crime, which is still there.
Oh gosh. Yeah, that's pretty bad. So yeah, not to get into too dark a part of history on this bit, but it kind of started out as they would have to do these monotonous chores like in the male prisons, things like road breaking or picking oakum, which is where you kind of unpick like ropes and stuff to be used for other things.
Yeah, if you read Oliver Twist, there's talk about doing that in the workhouse.
Definitely. And in the women's prisons, they would do things like knitting stockings, which is, I mean, if you've seen early Victorian stockings, they're very, very fine and hand knitted. So that is quite tedious work. And often the yarns would be provided by the prison, like they'd be the property of the prison governor or something. And then these female prisoners would have to knit the stockings, and then they would be sold basically for the profit of the governor, which is a pretty exploitative system. Now, there were some ways around this. In fact, it's recorded that the women would sometimes basically nick some of the yarn, like hide it away, and then make things for their own purposes that could be sold. And in fact, there's one record of, in this article, a lady called Ellen McGurch, which is a great name, who was found at her release to be wearing an undershift with stockings sewn to it and the hem doubled up. In the doubled up hem were secreted many muffetees, little knitted mittens. So obviously this enterprising lady was out to try and make herself a bit of money on her release. Good for her. Yeah, so often they would be able to earn a bit of money by it, and they would be able to sell them in the prison, like through the grates to people, and also during the assizes, so during the trials, they would be able to sell them to spectators of the trials. And so, yeah, by doing that, they were able to earn a little bit of money. In fact,
souvenir socks from a trial, basically.
Basically, you could go and watch a trial and then just do your haberdashery shopping at the same time.
I mean, I guess it's convenient.
Yeah. In fact, it actually pops up in the journal of Anne Lister, of all people. So if you're listening and you've not yet heard of Anne Lister, she was a 19th century landowner from Yorkshire who wrote diaries, which were recently, I think she wrote them in code, didn't she?
I believe so.
Yeah, and they were recently translated, and it turns out she was a notorious lesbian. And there was recently a BBC series made about her called Gentleman Jack.
Yeah, Saran Jones. If you're on Tumblr, you've definitely seen photo sets of it.
Probably.
Saran Jones looking very austere.
I'm really liking the Victorian butch lesbian look, though. Like, it's good. Anyway, she writes on Thursday, the 18th of October, 1821, in York. Went over the bridge, went shopping with my aunt, walked with my aunt around the castle yard because she wanted some knitted nightcaps of the debtors. So that's York Castle, which has a great museum in it. So yeah, early knitting in prisons could be as a punishment, essentially, as unpaid labor, or as a subversive way to make a bit of money for yourself or smuggle out some valuable goods on your release. And was mainly done in the women's prisons. Now, when the prison reform movement began with Elizabeth Fry, one of the ways in which she tried to improve the situation of women in prison was that she started teaching people to read and to do occupations like knitting. And they were able to actually earn some money from it, like legitimately. So the I think it was the Women's Prison Visiting Association, would go into prisons and teach the inmates to knit. And then they would hold these knitting circles, and the money and the items they knitted would be sold by the visiting women on behalf of the prisoners. And then they would hopefully be able to keep some of the money that they would be able to get on their release.
So, I realise this is a slight distraction, but calling them knitting circles, I imagine they weren't quite as twee as that, but I am just imagining the Cell Block Tango from Chicago as just like a little knitting natter. It's like, I'll never guess what my husband did. I'll do tell.
I love the knitting revenge fantasy circle idea there.
I mean, have you been to a knitting circle?
Yeah. That is exactly the kind of thing. My theory about it is that because knitting kind of relaxes your mind, and the movement of your hands takes your mind off things and makes you feel less nervous. And then that means that you just end up saying stuff that you normally would filter out.
I mean, that would explain some of the conversations at the Knitting Society when we were at uni.
It was Knit Sock After Dark was notorious. Our knitting society was called Knit Sock. It was great. We were very cool.
We were cool because it was entirely queer nerds, and you know, we're coming to the forefront.
Oh yeah, I mean, we're in these days. At least in the knitting world. It was great though, because it was just such a diverse group, and there was someone who could teach you anything as well.
Yeah.
But anyway, prison knitting. I imagine they weren't like
Prison,
particularly
school.
gossipy. Sorry?
Prison, school.
Yes. I imagine they weren't particularly like gossipy, everyone's best friends kind of knitting circles, but they did manage to significantly improve the conditions of women in the prison, which had a massive effect on reoffending, actually. In fact, I think the following year after they did it, only 4 inmates ended up back in prison the next year, compared to the men's rate, which was like 47 or 50.
That makes sense. I mean, not to be social theorist on Maine.
Yeah, I mean, who knew?
Like giving someone a means of supporting themselves and a purpose means they're less likely to do a crime.
Yeah, and also like, you know, giving them a means by which they can earn money, which they will have when they get out, so they don't get out with no money and then have to commit another crime. Yeah.
But anyway. Sorry.
No, I mean, this is also like a heavily like social issue podcast as well as craft history. So, and this particular subject is, I mean, they're kind of hand in hand. So yeah, that teaching skills as a way of improving the conditions and the agency of people who were imprisoned was quite a radical thing in the 19th century, and it did do quite a lot to improve conditions, particularly in the female prisons. And in fact, a lot of the rights that prisoners now have today, at least in the UK, are date back to Elizabeth Fry and the prison reform movement. So moving into the 20th century, I actually found a really cool story, which I did not expect at all. So in the 19th century, knitting was basically a way to make money while you were in prison. But in the 20th century and today, it's more of a therapeutic thing. Partly because it's very difficult to make money from knitting in the present day, or at least hand knitting. And also because now there is, thankfully, a lot more focus on the well-being of people in prison, although certainly not enough. And so this is taking place in Robben Island, which is the infamous South African prison where former president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, was imprisoned for 18 years. And this is a story about one of the prisoners, a man called Jerome Maake, I don't know how to pronounce that, Maakae, who had been taught to knit during the days before his arrest in the 80s. And he was living in a safe house at the time, and his hostess, who was a professional knitter, taught him to knit to give him something to do. And then once he was in prison, he requested some wool and some needles from the prison authorities, who apparently were quite reluctant. But eventually, yeah. Well, there's a whole debate about whether or not knitting needles are allowed on planes at the moment, I think. I've certainly flown with them before, but apparently some airlines consider them weapons. So
I was going to say you could take a crochet hook instead, but you could do some serious ocular damage with a crochet hook.
definitely. Not that I'm considering it, but you could.
If you were that way inclined.
So eventually they gave him some plastic needles. And other prisoners saw what he was doing and asked him to teach them. And he ended up teaching a lot of the other inmates the craft of knitting. And apparently in the evenings, the prisoners would visit one another's cells and take their knitting with them.
That's really cute.
Yeah, it's quite a nice story. And I like that as a way of, creating community in a place that's often quite infamous for having rivalries and stuff. And in a place where you're like actively discouraged from forming communities.
Witty.
So yeah, I like that as kind of as a way of reclaiming something that you're doing for yourself, and doing it together with other people.
Which is lovely.
Yeah, it's a nice little story. So moving into the present day, that's kind of what's happening now, is that now there is a lot more focus on well-being and mental health, or certainly there is in any any organization that is trying to be decent. And so there's a program, I think it started off in America with a program called Knitting Behind Bars, which uses knitting as a kind of mindfulness technique. And so they got permission after about 5 years to go into a prison in America and basically start a knitting group. And this was a men's prison. So at first, the prison authorities were all like, "Oh, nobody's going to want to do this. Like men don't want to knit." Yeah, which we know is not true because of knitting society. But yeah, so they were just like, no one's going to want to do this. Like, what's the point? But eventually they got permission to do it, and they took the needles and the yarn in, and started this group, and slowly people started coming to it. And yeah, apparently it's been pretty successful as a well-being thing, as a way to practice mindfulness. And a lot of the people knit for charity, so it kind of or knit things for their families outside. So it's kind of a way to reclaim that sense of being somebody who contributes rather than being stuck somewhere where you can't do anything. And contributing to things that you actually care about and to like your family and stuff, instead of like having to work for some company that's not paying you. And that kind of program is spreading. I think there's a few others like it that I've read about. So yeah, I think that's a good development.
That's really lovely.
Yeah, so that kind of ends on a somewhat more positive note than it began. But I wanted to talk about that because it's just something I never even knew was a thing or considered at all until I read this article. And then I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if there's more to it.
And there was.
Mm-hmm. As with many things. So yeah, that wasn't too I didn't go into too many specifics on the craft. But it was more the use of it that I was interested in this case.
Yeah, I mean it all sort of comes together to tell the stories, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I mean that is kind of what we do, isn't it, on Bread and Thread, is we tell a story through something specific.
And then we look at a strange local food.
So what is our local larder today?
I thought that I would talk about clotted cream because I was talking to some Americans and realized that when you've not grown up with the term, it sounds absolutely foul.
Now that you mention it, yeah, a clot doesn't have great connotations, does it?
Not hugely.
Okay, I'll bite. Tell me more about the cream.
So this is basically the fat of the cream of the milk separated off because it's easier to preserve just the creamy bit on its own, kind of the same as we make butter.
Okay.
Which seems to have been a thing in Phoenicia.
Wow.
Which is now the sort of Syria, Lebanon, Israel area.
That's pretty old.
But it's most well known as a product of Devon and Cornwall in England.
Yeah, you always have jam and clotted cream on your scones, right?
I'll get into this.
Is there going to be scone debate?
There is controversy.
Scone discourse. Oh no. Oh no.
Do you need a moment?
No, I'm fine. Continue.
So yeah, there's a debate as to it may have been introduced by traders who came to that area looking for tin. Because the Devon Cornwall area has been trading tin with the rest of the world since forever, basically. Although an ancient Greek geographer called Strabo,
that's a good name,
apparently mentioned British people doing a similar thing to what the Phoenicians were doing. So it's kind of unclear whether it was independently thought of, which seems more likely to me because it seems kind of obvious that you take the water out of something and it lasts longer.
Oh yeah.
Because we don't go around going, but where did you get the idea for butter from? I'd say that archaeologists exist. There probably is someone that goes around trying to make like a map of butter.
I'm sure someone somewhere has done that. Archaeology gets very specific.
But we do know that it was being made by monks in Tavistock, in Devon in the 14th century.
Okay.
And it was a well-known enough term that I think I mentioned in the trifle episode. In the 17th century, we have mentions of clouted cream.
That sounds like someone's beaten up a dish of cream.
It does, but also like no such thing as standardized spelling at this point, so they,
Hmm.
from context, we think that they probably meant clotted cream.
Okay, not just that somebody decided to have a fight with some cream.
Well, the thing is, if you beat up cream, it becomes butter.
Yeah, that's a good point.
To make clotted cream, you actually it's sort of a low and slow cooking of the cream,
Okay.
which is why it often has sort of a crust on the top, which is the
Ah,
best bit.
I didn't realize it was cooked. Okay, that
Yeah,
makes a lot of
there's
sense.
a lot of instructions online for how to make your own clotted cream.
Mm-hmm.
The agreement seems to be basically you heat it very, very slowly, basically overnight, and then you let it cool down very, very slowly for another like 8 hours. And then the
That
cream separates out, and you get the nice yellow skin, which, as I said, is the best bit. And then the clotted cream, and then the basically whey that you can just get rid of.
that seems like quite a complicated process.
Is it complicated? Or is it just hard to achieve without access to a fire?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess in ye olden times when people would have had a fire going in the house all day, it's a bit easier.
Yeah, because I imagine you could basically just suspend a container of cream over a fire and just let it do its thing.
Huh. Okay.
But the controversy that I was talking about, I promise not to make the pun again, is
What if I want you to?
whether you put the jam or the cream on your scone first.
Ah,
And it's
yes.
very much one is the way Cornwall does it, one is the way Devon does it.
There is only one right way, but everyone will tell you a different way.
Now, I have to ask you, Hazel, jam or cream first?
Now, I'm kind of a fan of the cream first, because if you put the jam on first and then you try and spread the cream, it just kind of turns into like a kind of mixed up mess. Whereas if you put the cream on first, the jam is easier to spread, so it doesn't get so like mixed.
You see, I'm cream on first because I find it hard to spread the cream on the jam without it mixing.
Okay.
But I feel like we should ask Nick, also being not from Devon or Cornwall, but nearer to it than either of us. Nick, jam or cream first? Thanks.
Also cream. Okay.
Yeah. But in 2013,
Mm-hmm.
the clotted cream company, Rodders,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is Cornwall based, commissioned a study by Dr. Eugenia Cheng of Sheffield, which concluded that the answer is in fact jam first.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Wait,
Although
for
famously
that.
David Cameron did that first while in Devon and it didn't go down well.
Oh, was that a big political faux pas?
It was made out to be one, yeah.
On the same level as Ed Miliband and the bacon sandwich. Maybe we could do an episode on famous political food-related gaffes.
If people have any examples of them, let us know. I would love to do this. But interestingly, sort of my final thing on clotted cream is it's very hard to get in America
Okay.
because generally unhomogenized milk is also unpasteurized.
Ah,
And you cannot sell unpasteurized milk in the US.
yeah.
Because obviously it's easier to make it with unhomogenized milk. Although I've seen some people use single cream, just as
Mhm.
it's already partly separated.
Okay. Wow. But the process of pasteurization is basically heating it to a certain level, right?
Yeah, but it's faster.
Oh, I see. Does it go to a higher temperature as well? Or...
Um, thing is, I haven't seen any specific temperatures for making your own clotted cream. I'm sure they are out there, but generally it just says a low to medium heat.
Okay.
Whereas pasteurizing has to be hot.
Yeah.
Just
Oh,
to
I
make sure
see.
it kills
Okay, yeah.
everything.
Yeah, so that wouldn't work for making clotted cream. Ah, wow.
So yet another thing that you cannot have in America. Like
Thanks to the man.
if you want a scone with clotted cream and blackberry jam in the US and blackcurrant jam, I'm going to start that sentence again. If you want a scone with clotted cream and blackcurrant jam in the US, you're out of luck.
Is that the most illegal scone?
I think that is the most illegal scone.
Scontraband.
I'm glad you also got to do a terrible pun.
Thanks. It makes me happy. Only trouble is I won't be able to stop it just scone now.
Interestingly, Cornish clotted cream is a protected designation of origin.
Okay.
So that's a thing in the EU where basically you can only put the place name on your product if it's actually from there.
Mm-hmm.
It applies to a lot of cheeses, I think.
Okay, and wines, right?
I don't know if champagne is a sort of geographically protected thing or if it's just people are like that.
Okay. It's only clotted cream if it comes from Cornwall. Otherwise, it's just warm milk.
Okay, champagne is legally, yes. Other British ones include Melton Mowbray pork pies
Oh, yeah.
and Herefordshire cider.
Ah, didn't know that. I've literally never heard of that.
Well, you're just not deep in the cider world,
No.
or the list of projected designation of origins.
Damn, I need to up my regional foods game.
So yeah, that is the surprisingly controversial clotted cream.
Oh, thank you. That was most informative.
Which I'm going to continue putting cream first.
Yeah, be a rebel. Do it your way.
Or maybe I'll mix it up. I don't know. I don't have strong feelings about the order.
I mean, yeah, neither of us are from Devon or Cornwall, so I suppose it's more of an intellectual exercise at this point rather than like a deep conviction.
Well, yeah, I'm from the north. It's a much bigger controversy whether it's scone or scone. The answer is scone. Fight me.
I use them interchangeably. Does that make me a bad person?
I think that's just proof that you're bi.
I feel called out. Okay. I hope you enjoyed this interesting journey of prison reform and scones. You can find us at Bread and Thread on Twitter and email us at breadandthreadpodcast@gmail.com.
We are also on Patreon, just Bread and Thread. If you want access to recipes and instructional and educational videos, I believe Hazel is working on one about her chickens.
There'll be chickens and there will be inkle weaving. Please tweet at us your favourite examples of political food faux pas.
Whether you put on the cream or the jam first.
Oh yeah, that's an important one.
Might do a poll.
And see you next time.
When we will have a special guest.
Oh, another special guest.
No, we're just recording out of order.
Oh. Oh yeah. I got excited. I thought we were having another one.
But yeah, go out and have some clotted cream if you can legally do so. And we'll see you next time.